We're still in the chapters 1 and 2 where it's oppression. Then we move into deliverance. We started that upstairs today, but I had this perfectly good Sunday school lesson, and I wasn't going to waste it. So, and so then we have God when he provides for them in the wilderness. The key element in Exodus, in my opinion, is chapter 20, where the Ten Commandments are given as the third element in the covenant. And then from there on out, it's how do we live together as God and God's people, and how do God's people live? So, chapter 2, verse 11, Moses grew up. He went out to where his own people were, so Moses knew who he was and where his people were from. He watched them at their hard labor and saw an Egyptian beating a Hebrew, one of his own people. So, again, Moses at 40, when Acts chapter 7, he understands he's Egyptian nobility, yet he identifies as known as a Hebrew, as an Israelite. By the way, we're going to use the words Hebrew and Israelite interchangeably here. You will find occasional hieroglyphs in Egypt that talk about, it looks like the Apru people, A-I-P-R-U. And the best guess is the Apru is the Egyptian, everybody's kind of guessing at how it's pronounced because it's a symbol. They think that's the Hebrew people. So there are archaeological evidence of, now they lie, and they tell the story that, at the Red Sea, the Apru were absolutely slaughtered, and you're going, not other way around, but it would have been bad PR to tell the truth. So that's the situation of Moses. So Moses' faith is described in Hebrews chapter 11. When he grew up, he refused to be known as the son of Pharaoh's daughter. Okay? Either they have a text we don't have, or this was what was commonly thought, and he's just preaching. He chose to be mistreated along with the people of God rather than enjoying the fleeting pleasures of sin, and disgrace for the sake of Christ is greater value than the treasures of Egypt, because he was looking ahead to his reward. By faith he left Egypt, not fearing the king's anger. He persevered because he saw him who is invisible. So the author of the Hebrews, if you read Hebrews, read it like it's a long sermon. And the writer is just sort of trying to bring people along. So I'm not saying that it's not factual, but there's a cadence and a understanding. Because like I said, refused to be known, and then he regarded disgrace for the sake of Christ. And you're going, okay, the Messiah, what are we talking about here? Moses did he understand who the guy in the burning bush was? Did he understand the angel of the Lord was pre-incarnate Jesus? So do you understand where I'm going with this? We just kind of read it and go. But the whole point of chapter 11 is the heroes of faith who are always looking ahead to the big thing that God has in store. So they faithfully do the work that's right in front of them because they have their eyes on the great prize, which is the kingdom of God, life with God forever, however you want to describe that, that's how it works. So Moses, looking this way and that, seeing no one, kills the Egyptian and hides him in the sand. Next day he goes out, sees two Hebrews, says to the one in the wrong, meaning Moses decided, based on one quick observation, he knows who's right, he knows who's wrong. Why are you hitting your fellow Hebrew? So again, we've talked about this before. The glance this way and that, this is a sign that what Moses is doing is not of God. Because the acts of God don't need to be done in secret. Like Jesus says in Matthew, there is nothing that is concealed that will not be disclosed, or hidden that will not be made known. So Christians always operate above board. We don't say, well, I'm going to tell you this, but you can't tell anybody else, and then go tell somebody else something else and tell them, oh, but you can't tell anybody else because you're thinking, I'm doing it for a good purpose. That's not the way it works. We always behave above board. Our national church body is currently in convention in Phoenix. I'm sure they got the rooms cheap because July in Phoenix, right? This is kind of like the pastors' conference is in a ski town in October. There's no snow, so we get the rooms cheap. Okay, so far we haven't made the national news, so good on us. But I can tell you that I have been privy to let's just call it politicking. And these are not ungodly people, but they're always trying to guard and watch themselves, and I appreciate that because they're going, I need to find a way to tell the truth about this event, and it may hurt to hear that, but I'm not saying this to be vindictive. I'm trying to just get the truth out about this or that. And then the accusation comes back, you're slandering so-and-so, and it's like, no, I'm not slandering them. I'm just saying we didn't handle this well. Or sometimes people will just sort of do that, kind of a slander thing because it's church people. We don't have to play like that. We can honestly be above board. A quick note, there's a difference between secrets and surprises. We teach this with body safety for kids after we had a youth worker here that hurt kids, and he was big on secrets. And the person we brought in to help us process that said, okay, we don't tell secrets. And one mom was like, but what if it's like a birthday present or Christmas presents, and we don't want to, we're going to buy this today, but it's for your brother for his birthday, keep it a secret. Okay? She said, there's nothing wrong with that. And she said, you're absolutely right. I'm going to suggest you use different wording, because secret is also how abusers get control over their victims. Say, this is a surprise, and we want the surprise as part of the fun. So don't tell him because it's a surprise. It's not a secret, it's a surprise. And I went, that makes a lot of sense, because a lot of things that I'm like, hey, keep this secret, so it's a surprise. She said, just leave the word secret out of it. And I went, I appreciate that. The reason I'm bringing this up is I just found a picture of the woman we brought in to help us through this. And because we're going through all my mom's old pictures, right, when we were sorting through the house. And I'm standing with this woman who comes up to about here on me. And I'm going, who is this teenager? And I flip it over because my mom always demanded that I write very carefully on the back of every picture who's in it, right? And I went, oh, that was Feather Burkhauer. She was the expert that we hired to help us process through this. And we did a whole Saturday educational event for how to keep your kids safe for parents and opened it to the community. But anyhow, that's surprises versus secrets may not be a big deal at this stage in our life, but just hang on to it and may come in useful. I can tell you after that education, we had a neighborhood thing, and we're barbecuing together, and somebody came up, 3 moms, and they're like, John, we don't know what to do. You're a pastor. And I'm like, oh, that's never a good thing that happens at a party when someone comes up and starts with, you're a pastor. And they said, we just found our kids in the backyard naked. What do we do? And I'm like, I knew the kids, knew how old they were, and I went, oh, here's what I just learned at church. Say, we play with our clothes on. And they went, but what about, and I said, what the expert told me was don't freak out about it because that's going to make it like, tantalizing. Just, I'm sorry, we play with our clothes on around here. And then privately you can talk to your kid about curiosity and that sort of thing, but don't turn it into a big deal. Don't lecture them, don't shame them, just tell them we play with our clothes on. And it was like, you're a genius. And I'm like, no, I just listened to Feather. That's all that I did. Same thing I invited you to, and you said, I don't want to spend a whole Saturday on that. So the man who was beating his Hebrew brother says, who made you ruler and judge over us? You're going to kill me like you killed the Egyptian. Moses was afraid. What I have done must have become known. So I'm just amazed at Moses' naivete at this point. One, did he assume that his authority as Prince of Egypt would just sort of transfer and people would logically say, well, you are ruler and judge over us. We haven't seen you for 37 years since you got, since your mom finished breastfeeding you, but of course you're in charge. Or did he assume that because who he was as a Hebrew, of the tribe of Levi, that suddenly people would, or did he assume that, well, we're all in this together. I may have be dressed like an Egyptian, I may have never been beaten by a slave driver, but we're all Hebrews here. And none of these are flying for his fellow Hebrews. What I did must have become known. My first question is this guilt? Is he going, oh, it finally hit him? Or did he realize that despite looking both ways, he really was seen? Or here's my personal theory. He's a prince, right? And he is going, it was just another worker. And didn't think that this guy had family that missed him or friends. And so they went looking for him when he didn't come home from work. He was just kind of, flying at the 30,000 foot level of like, well, you can't make an omelet without breaking some eggs. And the real people are going, what happened to Bob? And they find Bob buried in the sand, with a, and they go, oh. And then, investigation begins. Pharaoh, however, hears of this, and he tries to kill Moses. But Moses fled from Pharaoh, goes to live in Midian, sits down by a well. So why did Pharaoh want to kill Moses? Was it simply you're a murderer and, the hand, by blood, live by the sword, die by the sword? Or is Pharaoh going, oh, what was he doing? Was he trying to foment rebellion among the slaves? I'm guessing Pharaoh was thinking politically and not just, because I think, what does he care that, another minion has died? Unless Bob was particularly important to him. But I think he's going, uh-oh, we got to watch this guy. Yes?
It's a miracle in itself that Moses, raised from birth as an Egyptian,
Yeah.
that as an adult, he wants to turn around and protect the Hebrew.
Right. Yeah, so there's something there. And we talked, boy, it's been weeks since we met. But one of the last times we met, we talked about how sometimes dynastic change in Egypt shifted, like, was it more African or was it more Middle Eastern? That it would kind of go back and forth, being right there on the cusp where those two continents meet, where Asia and Africa meet. And so there, you will go back through Egyptian art and you'll see some folks have more African features, some folks have more Arab features. So it could be that, the Africans are in charge and Moses still looks like he's from the Fertile Crescent. So it could be that, and that might have been how he identified. But it also just could have been that his mom drilled into him when she was breastfeeding him, these are your people, this is who you are, you're going to get raised by these strangers, but we're your people. I don't know, I wasn't there. But he does, at 40 years old, he decides these are my people.
But when I was breastfed, I don't remember.
Yeah, I was bottle raised, so that explains everything. But no, I am. So I don't know, and I've heard this before, Ron, and having 0 kids, right, and never breastfeeding a puppy, obviously. I've raised some dogs, never raised a human. But they tell me that sometimes people would, like, it didn't happen as quickly as, we sort of, we go to soft food and formula, you just, that Moses might have been 4 by the time he was done, or 5, that he was just around. I don't know this, folks. It's absolutely out of my wheelhouse. I've heard it, and those of you who know better, please feel free to correct me and tell the group what the truth is. So Moses flees to Midian. This is where Midian is. If you're thinking national boundaries, like the difference between U.S. and Canada, it's not that. It's more of a tribal area controlled by people who are all ancestors of each other. It's a league of tribes. The Midianites are the descendants of Abraham through Keturah. That's the woman he marries after Sarah dies. And he has a past 8 kids with her. And one of them settles here and ends up becoming part of the tribal alliance of his ancestors. And just as a kind of a nice bookend, when Joseph is carried to Egypt and sold as a slave, it's Midianites who are making the journey. If you like, I read a book on world trade once. It was fun. But this area here and here and here were amazingly popular spots because things would come up to here, and then the Midianites would then take the imports from further east, like incense and light things, and they'd load them on camels. So you could get about 400 pounds on a camel. And then you'd camel them over, and all through here would be, you'd kind of be the traveling salesperson. You'd come through carrying silk and incense and other things, and you'd pull up to a settlement or a village, and it would be like market day. And people would be like, "Oh yes, we need some extra incense down at the temple." And they would, but water was far easier to transit goods on, so the ships would land here, and then it would go up by land route. And then, of course, people would sail all the way up. But and just like today, if you could control the entry to these waterways, so there's a history of fortifications of various nations saying, we're going to take over this area, and we'll be in charge. You'll have to come through us, and we will, we'll make a deal. And so this area here has been fought over, during the British East India Company. This was, Britain would have massive naval forces to keep these waterways open so they could get stuff up to here, because it's way quicker to transit stuff from here to the Mediterranean, and then in the Mediterranean they go on different boats. Anybody been to Venice? Me either. Okay. When this was the trade route, I'm sorry, I'm way off topic. This is what made Venice rich, because they controlled all the shipping up here. And then when they started sailing around the other way, Magellan and them, that's when Venice went back and Spain became a world power. So, just for fun. And I got to show off that I read a book on world trade. Okay. We end with, okay. Moses sitting down by a well at the end of verse 15. Now there's a priest in Midian who has 7 daughters. They come to draw water, but some shepherds came along and drove them away. Moses got up, came to the rescue, and watered the flock. We've all seen the movie. Charlton Heston stands up and rescues the damsels in distress in Technicolor. So who is this priest of Midian? His name, goes by 2 different names, Ruel or Rule, and Jethro. He's called Jethro in Exodus 18. This is Moses' father-in-law who comes to visit him and says, hey, the way you're leading these people is just going to exhaust you and them. You need to create bureaucracy and do this instead, and it works. Scholars disagree which deity deity or deities were worshipped by the Midianites. Sometimes Jethro, Ruel, the priest, definitely talks and uses the biblical name for God. But we don't, and so maybe he was, through Abraham, still hanging on to that. And it may not have been that every tribe was the same. Just like when you get into the kingdom, and you have the southern tribes and the northern tribes, and some people go for this idol and some people go for that false god, and there are all different reasons why you do various things. So Moses comes to the rescue of the damsels, the 7 daughters. He rescues, he couldn't rescue Israel in Egypt, but he can rescue 7 girls. And I think this is the beginning of his remedial education. He is starting to see himself and going, okay, this is doable for me. This is what I can do. I wanted to start at the top. I wanted to, just be in charge. And now I'm understanding you start at the ground floor and you work your way up. So I think this is part of Moses' remedial education. When I was graduating from seminary in 1988, I would have classmates, and we had to fill out paperwork to say, like, what kind of ministry are you interested in? Okay? It's like, so, and I was like, I don't know, because I was like, oh, I want to be a pastor. I have no idea what kind of church. But I'd have classmates who were like, well, I'd like a congregation of at least 300 or 400, and I'll be the senior pastor. And the person who sorted the paperwork was kind of like, okay, now let's redo this and understand, you're 26 years old, 25 years old. Nobody is going to put you in charge of that large an organization because it's going to crash and burn. So what you're telling me is you'd like to be an assistant or an associate pastor in a larger church and learn how it's done, or would you like to be a sole practitioner in a much smaller church and see if you can grow it to be that size church? And it would be like, but I'm a pastor. And it was like, you're not even a pastor yet. You're still in seminary. Okay, trust me, you don't have the skills. So Moses, I think God takes Moses out to the wilderness here in Midian because he's teaching him this is a form of humility, of saying, I'm not going to start at the top and lead a giant rebellion. I'm going to just be rescuing little things. And the biblical principle here is faithful in small things, God entrusts with larger things. From little things, big things come. So, and the Bible also says that Moses not only drives away the rude shepherds, but he also physically waters. So there probably were like troughs, and then there would be a well. And you'd have a big clay jar on a rope, and you'd let the clay jar down, and it would fill with water, and then you'd have to lift it up. But keep in mind, if there's hard sides on the well, if it's rocky or something, you can't let a clay jar go ping, ping, ping on the way up, because by the time you get there, no clay jar, right? So you'd have to have the upper body strength to be able to let this thing down in the middle and raise it up without hitting the sides, and then dump it into the trough, do it again. And so it would have been like a bunch of work to do this. And I think this is where Moses is starting to learn that real leaders are always servants, that you're always going to be looking after and taking care of oftentimes very little things, that you don't start by, like, I'll have my assistant take care of that. It starts with, let me take care of that. And eventually people are going to come along and say, let me do that for you. I'd like your attention over here instead. So I think that's a key of a good leader. Ed Mormon used to be like, how did you see that? Because I'd have to call Ed and say, Ed, we got a problem. There's like water leaking here. And he was like, what were you even doing in that room? And I'm like, well, Ed, my father ran a business, and he taught me that every day you walk through your business. And with my dad, part of it was checking on all the employees. There was about 30 or 40 of them. But it was also like, if you could spot a problem early, I used to be at a place where the guy that owned it was a multimillionaire. And I would watch him walk through and pick up trash off the floor. and throw it away. He didn't be like, oh, I'm going to fire a janitor. He was just like, I'll take care of it. And it's those things that stick in your head and you go, oh, that's what real leadership looks like. Because all of a sudden, and what I noticed out of that in Louisiana, the multimillionaire, was all of his employees started to treat that like it was their own because they understood what the boss expected because they watched him do it. And they were like, oh, we are going to take care of things. This is important. This is who we are. The girls return home to Ruel, their father, and he asks them, why are you home so early? In other words, normally you have to wait for the boys to finish and then you can finally do it. And they go, well, an Egyptian rescued us. And he even drew water for us and watered the flock. Where is he? Why did you leave him there? Invite him home. Give him something to eat. So hospitality starts to become a big issue. Dad asks, where is he? Among desert-dwelling people at this time, according to the people who study this sort of thing, hospitality demanded that travelers be offered food and water. That was just the code of the land. Good manners would also say, if somebody did you that big a favor, rescuing you, helping you like that, you should offer them something. So the daughters are kind of doubly rude. And they don't offer hospitality to their rescuer. And they know he's not from around these parts that he's traveling through because they identify him as an Egyptian. So despite the fact, Ron, that he does genetically look like a child of Abraham, yeah. I'm guessing, he must have been wearing clothes or something that they went, oh, this guy's an Egyptian. They don't say, oh, he's probably one of our long-lost relatives from the tribes that went down. You know, there he looks at.
I just came from Egypt.
Yeah, and he spoke in hieroglyphics, right?
He texted him.
Yeah. I couldn't find a different way to make that work. And I want you to know, I did work with an AI to try to. There's some early medieval art that has like God in the bush, so it's not just flames, but there's like a figure in there, and Moses down here. And I tried to get the AI to take that picture and make both God and Moses have cell phones. And AI said, that's religious art. We're not going to touch that. That could be offensive to too many people. So I had to give up that visual idea. So anyhow, Moses evidently does get invited home and does stay for a while. And he ends up marrying one of the women, one of the daughters, Zipporah. And she gives birth to a son, and Moses names him Gershom, saying, I have become a foreigner in a foreign land. So he ends up spending about 40 years in exile. So by the time he's actually ready to go to work, by God's standards, he's 80 years old. This whole 40-year exile is just compiled down to a few verses. He works with or for Jethro, and I think he's kind of a mentor-mentee. He learns things here. Because later on, I've already mentioned Exodus 18, this guy shows up bringing his daughter, Moses' wife, because she stayed home for a while. Or, somehow she ended up back at home and Moses was busy leading God's people. And when Jethro shows up, Moses would take his seat every day, and all day long people would come to him with their problems because he was the one leader. And they would, it doesn't say what the problems are, but it's like, Bob ate my goat. Okay. And Moses would have to listen, Bob, is that true? Well, but the goat was eating my hay, and so I figure I have a part, And so he'd have to wait through that whole thing. Then he'd make a decision, and then next case. And Jethro watches him doing that, and it goes, this is not good. The way you're leading here, you cannot make all these decisions. So go around, find smart guys from all the groups, you have 12 of them, and teach them what you know. So, and then have everybody take their cases to somebody within their own tribe. And then the tough ones, you're going to become the appellate court, and they can say, this one's beyond us, take that one to Moses. And Moses can go and take that one to God and come back with the answer. And many more people get their cases heard. There's justice. Many more people are satisfied. But Moses, by this point, is open to learning at that point and saying, yeah, you're right. What I'm doing is not good. And if you've ever been in an organization where the boss keeps all the information to themselves and won't share and won't allow decision making to go on, if you read a little history of like World War II, one of the things, and right frankly, right now between Ukraine and Russia, Ukraine has a far more egalitarian military, and if somebody like goes down, like the next guy can step up and take over. Whereas Russia is autocratic, top down, and you dare not make a mistake or you're going to end up in a gulag. And so they become very hidebound. In World War II, one of the things that made the Battle of the Bulge eventually an Allied success was that, you know, the first thing a German sniper would do would be take out the officers, right? And then you take out communication. And so they would kill an officer. And then all of a sudden the column would keep moving. And they're like, but we killed the officer. You know, I mean, they should have stopped. And it was like, well, no, that meant sergeant somebody got a field promotion and you keep going. That's the way Jethro is saying you need to work with. You work with the people you have, you train them, and then you move on. Our call committee had an interesting reaction. They're talking to potential candidates for us. And they're saying, well, we like to do, you know, like, for example, one of the questions was, in our service, lay people are active. Like they do the readings, including women, because in some churches that doesn't happen. So just aware of that, okay? And one candidate was like, oh no, I'm the pastor. I would have to do that. And another guy was like, wow, really? You know, the cool thing about being a pastor is people will call and say, we'd like you to come and be our pastor, but we want to do this part of your job. You know, could you imagine applying at any other job where people are going, we'd like you to come and be, you know, our sales manager, but Bob here wants to do this part of your job, and Joan is going to do that part of your job. That would be okay with you? And he goes, I love this about the church. And, you know, so we also had one candidate who was like, we said, well, we have lay-led Bible studies, you know. Pastor looks at the curriculum, talks to the leaders, but then it's like, yeah, you go teach, you're smart. And he's like, oh no, I would have to teach every Bible class because I'm the pastor. So, oh yeah. So like the church that I grew up in now, not when I was growing up, okay, it was very different when I was growing up, but they have two pastors and there is not a Bible class that is taught in a church that averages about 800 in worship that is not taught by the pastor. And I'm like, okay, you know, and yeah, but it's like, oh no, if you know, you might get it wrong, and I'm like, then you correct it, you know. I once had a Bible class where it was like Kathy Walker, who went to Lutheran, you know, raised in the pastors, went to Lutheran education all of her life, including college. And there was like 3 other people who had like master's degrees in elementary Lutheran education. And they were like, you know, somebody was like, you let those women lead? And I'm like, they have more theological education when it comes to teaching than I do. You know, I've had one class at seminary. You know, I talk with them, you know, and we go, well, here's the lesson. Anyhow, I also, final point, I think 4 decades in the desert got Moses ready so that when he got all the people in the desert and they went, oh my God, this is very different from Egypt, Moses could say, I've been here, I've done this, it's okay. So I will illustrate from my life on this one. My first congregation down in Louisiana, I had a 3-year-old that had bad leukemia. And I was going, my first funeral in this church, my first funeral as a pastor, I'd done one on a vicarage because the pastor called the funeral home and said, next one that wants a Lutheran, you know, call my vicar because he needs to do a funeral. and I need to walk them through because nobody died that year in the church, okay? And so I buried a shrimp boat captain that was nominally Lutheran. Captain Bob, that's what I remember by these days. Anyhow, I'm going, oh my God, my first funeral is going to be for a 3-year-old, and I have no idea how to deal with this. And God, in his wisdom, sent a retired doctor into my congregation who said, you know, John, I'm volunteering with our local hospice, and I think they need a chaplain. Would you be interested? And I said, yes, I would, because I need to get familiar with death, dying, grieving, that whole thing, so I can take care of the people I have, because if the first funeral is going to be for a 3-year-old, we're going to be a sobbing wreck. And I need some experience. So I got 9 years plus of hospice chaplaining, and the 3-year-old responded well to treatment, and she has kids of her own now. So yeah, so praise God. And the first funeral I did was for the doctor who took me into hospice. Really just God's strange timing, and so. But I got to honor him and with a Christian funeral. But I think that level of experience just pays off. Oh Lordy. Moses starts off with, I'm a stranger in a stranger land. Here's my point on this one. You and I, we're supposed to live as strangers in a strange land. Peter says, dear friends, I urge you, as foreigners and exiles, abstain from sinful desires which wage war against your soul. In other words, we walk around, we take care of creation because God gave us that command, but at the same time we go, this world is not my home. We sang, what hymn did we sing today that reminded me of that? Anyhow. The king of Egypt died. The Israelites are continuing to groan in their slavery. They cry out to help for God. God heard their groaning, remembered his covenant with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. I don't think God had forgotten it up to that point. Remembered does not mean like God went, oh, I forgot all about that. It means like God was like, yep, the time is finally right. So God looked on the Israelites and was concerned about them. 40 years in Midian is a long time. Israel spent 430 years, depending upon the text, even a longer time. But God was at work the whole time. They cry to help for God, and God is still at work. Just a reminder, folks, in our lives, when things aren't going the way you want them to, God is still at work. I was visiting with a family this week, taking communion to them, and we were having the conversation about 40 years. During that 40 years is a long time. A bunch of people suffered for 40 years. Yeah. And for what they were going through as a family, they were like, that makes sense, because we know God is with us, but boy, it's hard. I said, yep, you're absolutely right. All right. So with that in mind, I'm heading upstairs. I'll gladly continue the dialogue in the lobby while I'm greeting for second service. Go in peace. Have a great week.
Moses must have been a slow learner. Taking 40 years.
I think so.